Welcome to the third episode of the Zoological Society of London's Wild Science podcast. I'm Monni, and I am still a postdoctoral researcher here at the Zoological Society. Well, February, as usual, was short and sweet, but I very much hope that most of you can still remember what you did on the 18th of February. What? No idea? Well, the 18th of February was a Saturday, so hopefully many of you got to have a well-deserved lie-in, and then I hope you all went out to celebrate World Pangolin Day. Yes, the third Saturday of February is World Pangolin Day. What is that you say? The what day? World Pangolin Day. The pangolin is a mammal, a scaly-anteater, think for want of a better image, a pine cone with 4 legs and a tail. Now, why would you want to celebrate World Pangolin Day? After all, at least according to the website daysoftheyear.com, the same day was also World Whale Day, again zoological, so we like this one here too at ZSL. Battery Day. Where would we be without the humble battery? Well, for one, my recorder wouldn't work, so there would be no podcast. And of course, Drink Wine Day. Well, the reason why you should celebrate World Pangolin Day above all is to find out more about these weird and wonderful creatures, which are sadly famous for being the world's most trafficked wild mammal. So in this podcast, we recap World Pangolin Day, talk about the immense threats that these amazing creatures find themselves under, the solutions to the problem, and, maybe crucially, find out about what it takes to be a pangolin specialist. For the purpose of this, I am here with 3 guests who know a lot about pangolins and what to do to protect them. And before we start, who says you can't combine World Pangolin Day with Drink Wine Day? I almost certainly did. Right, so let's talk to my first guest. I'm here with Dan Challenger from the IUCN Pangolin Specialist Group. Dan, for the benefit of our listeners, how would you best describe a pangolin?
I think I best describe a pangolin as something crossed between a dinosaur and a pine cone. If you look at one, it looks like essentially a pine cone on legs with the stance of a Tyrannosaurus and a long tail.
Excellent, I like it. Right, so how many species of these pine cone crossed with a Tyrannosaurus are there in the world?
Well, there's 8 species of pangolins in total, 4 native to Africa and 4 native to Asia. So in Africa, you have the long-tailed or black-bellied pangolin, Fatagenus tetradactyla, the white-bellied or tree pangolin, Fatagenus tricuspis. In eastern southern Africa, you have Temminck's ground pangolin, Smutzia temminckii, and then you have the giant pangolin, Smutzia gigantea. And in Asia, there's 4 species, as I said. There's a Chinese pangolin, Manis pentadactyla, the Indian pangolin, Manis crassicaudata, the Sunda pangolin, Manis javanica, and the Philippine pangolin, which was only described as a distinct species in the late 90s and early 2000s, Manis culianensis.
I expect all our listeners to remember the Latin names, as there will be a test at the end of this podcast. So there is a claim that the pangolin is the world's most trafficked wild mammal. What is the evidence for this, and why are they so heavily trafficked?
Well, the evidence base that pangolins are the world's most illegally trafficked wild mammal actually comes from some research that I've been involved in. So some of the work that I did as part of my doctorate was to try and document the scale of the trade, illegal trade in pangolins, focused primarily in Asia. And to do that, I collated a lot of data on seizures and confiscations of pangolins that had been made in Asia, and then worked out how many animals that likely involved. And between 2000 and the end of 2016, that trade involved approximately 277,000 pangolins, mainly Asian pangolins, but increasingly African ones. And so that's the basis for this calculation. And when you're looking at illegal trade and trying to estimate numbers involved, lots of people make an assumption that we only seize about 10% of actual trade that's taking place, accounting for or trying to account for trade that goes undetected and unreported. But I wasn't comfortable using that as a parameter because it's a bit of a stab in the dark. So we've used something more conservative and assumed that the seizures that we've put together comprise 25% of all trade that takes place. So, I mean, there's still an element of uncertainty in that, but extrapolating 277,000 animals at a rate of, assuming 25% of those are seized, gives us today a number which is more than 1 million. So that's the basis for this figure.
And what are they traded for specifically?
So they're primarily traded internationally, at least, to meet demand in East and Southeast Asian markets, such as China and Vietnam, where there's a long history of eating the pangolin's meat, the body of the animal, as wild meat. But increasingly today it's because of urban consumption, and it's business elites, sometimes government officials, rich, affluent people that consume pangolins in restaurants, either to reinforce social ties among their friends and peers and family, or, for example, at banquets and business dinners, business deals, that sort of thing. And I've seen this myself in Vietnam, where people will go into a restaurant and order a pangolin, and it's brought in live, and it's killed in the restaurant in front of the consumers, and then it's taken away to the kitchen to be cooked. I mean, so that's one thing, is pangolin meat. The second main thing is pangolin scales. So they're covered in scales. The major parts of their body, with the exception of the sort of ventral surface and the inside of the limbs, are covered in scales. And the scales are used in traditional medicines in China and Vietnam, where there's a long history of using animal and plant parts. And the traditional pharmacopoeia in China and Vietnam prescribe pangolin scales for use in medicines to help cure skin diseases, to help with, as an example, psoriasis, to help lactating women secrete milk, and other things. It's purported that cancer is something that pangolin scales are used for as well. So there's a whole range of applications. So those are the two main reasons why they're trafficked.
So what is the role of the pangolin specialist group? How are you ensuring that pangolins are not going to go extinct?
Well, the Pangolin Specialist Group was set up in 2012 in recognition that pangolins did appear to have an increasing extinction risk, but there wasn't one body internationally representing Africa and Asia and expertise from elsewhere in the world to convene the different stakeholders and try and scale up pangolin conservation. And so we act as an advisory body to IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and we work on various different levels to help support pangolin conservation. So, as an example, we assess the species for the IUCN Red List, which is to determine their conservation status globally and to measure extinction risk. We provide technical input to international conventions such as CITES, and we've participated in recent meetings there. We provide support to range states where people are seeking to scale up pangolin conservation and come up with action plans. And we also act as a convener for stakeholders internationally.
So how did you get involved in pangolin work? Is it all down to your PhD work, or was there a secret love affair with pangolins beforehand?
Probably the latter, if I'm being totally honest. I went to South Africa in 2005 and looking through Jonathan Kingdon's field guide of African mammals, the pangolins stood out as these species that I would like to see if I could, probably because they look so strange and dinosaur-like. And so it became a running joke when I was in South Africa. I'd like to see a pangolin. And I narrowly missed out on seeing one. Some of my colleagues that were there did see one. I'd opted to go into town that day to fetch supplies instead of going into the bush to do a game count. And my colleagues saw one and I didn't. And I think now that was what sparked my interest, because I came back from South Africa and I got increasingly interested and involved in the species. And it seemed that they were increasingly threatened, but there was nobody acting to do anything to show some leadership to this problem and to act upon it.
Fantastic. And lastly, what would you like to be the 3 messages that people take away from this podcast about pangolins?
I think the 3 biggest messages for me should be that pangolins exist. An increasing number of people know that they do exist now, but not all that many still, relatively. So 1, that pangolins exist. 2, that they're in trouble. Their conservation predicament isn't great. 2 species are listed as critically endangered, for example. But 3, that conservation action has started for pangolins. The last few years has seen something of a pangolin conservation movement, and we're starting to see now real attention and investment in pangolins and their conservation. So that would be the 3rd one. But that, of course, needs to be sustained going forward.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Right, I am now with the Zoological Society's resident pangolin expert, Carly Waterman. Carly, in a nutshell and for the uninitiated, how would you describe a pangolin?
Hi, Monni. So I've heard pangolins described variously as mini dinosaurs or pine cones with tails. I think they look a bit like artichokes with tails.
Fantastic. So we already had dinosaurs, we already had pine cones, now you've also had the artichoke. Now, you've found yourself working with a lot of weird and wonderful species in the past. How did you get involved in pangolin work?
I've been working at ZSL for about 11 years now, and I started off working on the Edge of Existence programme. And Edge prioritises species for conservation attention based on how evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered they are. So, in other words, it prioritises species that are both threatened and a bit weird in the way they look, live and behave, or a bit unique. And that's a really good way to describe pangolins. So all pangolins are edge species, so they're really high priorities for conservation attention. So I started supporting pangolin conservation through my activities as the Edge Programme Manager and grew to love pangolins and wanted to work with them full time. So just over a year ago I moved positions and I'm now in the lucky position of being able to work full time on pangolin conservation.
Working full time on artichokes. How did you celebrate World Pangolin Day?
I love World Pangolin Day. So this year I spent most of the day at ZSL London Zoo, and I was helping a colleague in the living collections man a stall to raise awareness of pangolins. So we created a giant mural. We had little pangolins curled up, looking a bit like a scale, that people could come and colour in, mostly children, but quite a few adults coloured in a pangolin as well. And then we stuck all the scales onto a giant pangolin and made a beautiful, colourful mural that will hopefully be on display in the zoo in the near future. So lots of awareness raising about pangolins and celebrating the existence of these amazing animals.
So we've already heard from Dan that there are currently 8 pangolin species that are recognised. How threatened are these species?
So all pangolins are threatened with extinction. Sadly, we've got 2 in Asia that are critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, so they're estimated to have population declines of up to 80 or 90%, which is really quite alarming. Another 2 in Asia are listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List, and the 4 African species are all listed as vulnerable. And all 8 species of pangolin are listed on the basis of estimated population declines, and that's as a result primarily of overexploitation.
So given the immense threats that these species are under, we should really talk a bit about possible solutions. What do you see as a possible way to secure a future for pangolins? What needs to change?
That's a really good question. So it's quite simple, really. We need to stop the poaching, we need to stop the trafficking, and we need to stop the demand. So we know what we need to do. Doing it is the hard part. I would say that we need to protect wild pangolin populations, which is quite difficult because we don't know very much about the status of wild populations of pangolins anywhere in the world. So we need to figure out how to go out and survey for pangolins, how to identify pangolin strongholds, sites that are important to pangolins where they can be protected, and how to protect them. So that could range from doing anti-poaching patrols to engaging local communities to strengthening law enforcement. At the same time, we need to be reducing demand for pangolins, and that's probably the most important long-term conservation priority, because while demand still persists, there will always be they'll always be trafficked. So traffickers will always find a way to circumvent the law, and we need to do that by changing the behaviour of key consumers of the different pangolin products.
And what would you like to be the 3 messages that people take away from this podcast?
Well, I think, first of all, I hope that you've enjoyed learning about pangolins, and I hope you go away and feel inspired to find out more about them and spread the word about pangolins. So tell everybody you know about what pangolins are, why they're so amazing, what the threats are, and what you can do to help conserve them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So my next guest is Paul de Ornelas, also from the Zoological Society of London, who is working on pangolin conservation in Africa. Paul, we've been having this discussion what a pangolin most resembles. Do you think it's more like an artichoke or more like a pine cone?
That's a very difficult question. I don't think either of them are ideal, but I'm going to go with artichoke.
Good, that's settled then. Moving on to more serious things. We've heard from Dan and Carly already that pangolins are highly threatened in the wild. What do you think are solutions to the threats that pangolins are facing? How do we best conserve this species?
There's going to be a range of different things that we have to do because there's, to some extent, different aspects to the threats that they face. So where I primarily work in forests of West and Central Africa, there are 3 species of pangolin found across the country of Cameroon, primarily in the forests there. They will have been eaten by people probably for as long as people and pangolins have lived next to one another. However, recently, as we're seeing 2 things really, increased consumption locally. As forests are opened up, you're getting increased infrastructure, roads and so on. So you're able to get easier access to pangolins, so there's overhunting that way. But we're also seeing that a lot of consumption in Asia, depleting stocks of pangolins there, and we're seeing increased threats, pangolins being hunted in Africa and then shipped across to Asia. So the 2 main aspects that I think we probably need to do is 1, protect them on the ground, and then the other is look at what's actually driving that, which is the demand for pangolins and pangolin products.
Excellent. So in terms of protecting pangolins on the ground, what is it that you guys are doing in Cameroon? Tell us about it.
Okay, so ZSL works in a place called the Dja Biosphere Reserve, World Heritage Site, slap bang in the middle of the Congo Basin, incredible moist tropical forest, home to great apes, so gorillas, chimps, forest elephants, but also all 3 of those species of pangolins that I mentioned. And some of the things that ZSL does is, number 1, we work with the government who manage the park to try and what we'd call sort of enhance their boots on the ground. So the people who are actually there on the ground deterring poachers, perhaps intercepting poachers and helping them through equipping them, training them, providing them with sort of new tools like smart software that can help enhance what they're doing on the ground. So that's one aspect. The other is that we will sort of enhance law enforcement. So pangolins are actually protected, fully protected now in Cameroon. Despite that, they're still hunted, they're still traded and trafficked. So enhancing the ability of people to sort of enforce those laws to protect them. So that might be just simple training and mentoring of law enforcement officers. It might be providing funds to help legal cases, or it might even be providing what we might call civil society oversight. So corruption can be a bit of an issue, and if we have people present from civil society, as in an NGO like ZSL, when people are arrested or perhaps when they're brought before judges and so on, it can help draw people's attention to the fact that the outside world is looking on things. So those would be the main things that we would do on the protection front.
And what about involving local communities in your project? Is there any kind of community involvement?
Around where we work, the Dja Biosphere Reserve, tropical rainforest, but it's not just got wildlife there. It's certainly people are an intrinsic part of that system. So you'll have forest-dependent peoples, whether they're indigenous peoples or whether there are people who've moved there more recently, and they will be living hunting, sustainable farming, etc., or potentially unsustainable, but living in that landscape. And they're key actors. There may be the people involved in hunting, there may be people in local communities who see things going on, and so on. So ZSL has been working with those communities to look at ways that we can develop secure phone lines that people can ring in on if they see something going on or if they hear of something. And then also something called Excites, which is extreme citizen science. And that provides these little handheld devices like smartphones and things that can be set up even for people who are illiterate and allows them to both record things that are going on in their locale, whether that's illegal activities, illegal hunters, but also even things like law enforcement going on, just so you can keep an eye on things so that people aren't using law enforcement disproportionately on the wrong groups of people.
So I like the idea of extreme citizen science. It's like extreme ironing, just with more purpose. So we're recording this podcast for people who might have never previously heard about pangolins. What would you like to be the main messages that people take home from this?
So if you've never heard of a pangolin, I think the first thing is that pangolins exist. there are 8 species of a mammal which we've already heard looks like a cross between an artichoke or a pine cone or somewhere in between, but basically like nothing else you'll have ever seen. They are truly remarkable creatures to look at, but at the moment they're also some of the most threatened creatures in the world. So illegal trade is potentially driving all 8 of those species to extinction. However, there are things that people are doing, and there are things that we can do to protect them and stop them going extinct. I think if people can take home that concerning but positive message, then I think that would be great.
Cool, thank you, Paul. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our recap of World Pangolin Day. We've learned that pangolins are weird and wonderful creatures that look like pine cones, or dinosaurs that look like pine cones, or dinosaurs that look like artichokes. We also found out how pangolins are highly threatened by poaching and wildlife trade. I think calling for something of a campaign slogan: poach artichokes, not pangolins. Now, maybe this is not an everyday decision for most of us, but here's how you can help by spreading the word about pangolins. Become pangolin enthusiasts. We've clearly met 3 very enthusiastic people here today. And next year on World Pangolin Day, remember the 3rd Saturday in February, spare a thought for pangolins and maybe raise a glass of wine to them too.